part two. So hierarchical scale, just to reiterate, is usually the larger person. That means they're most important, and smaller means less important. When we looked at the gleaners, that is true, but it's reversing the hierarchy of the culture or the status of the people in the image. Millet is here elevating the lowest of the low, the gleaners that come in after the harvest and pick what they can. We looked at this piece, but more typically, it is a larger figure here, such as a pharaoh, and he's subjugating other people or killing them, and he is conquering them. So they are smaller, and often they are lower. And we're going to look at, this is the same piece. Don't get confused, but this one is outlined and that one is not. In the Paladin Narmer, we see here Narmer as this larger figure by far. This is about the unification of Egypt, by the way, this particular piece. And so he's about to kill this person, and then these guys have already passed on. This is a register here, and often you see this in different types of art, usually three-dimensional works, chalice, like a chalice or a sculpture, that tells you what's most important is in the upper register, meaning this section here. Once the line is drawn, this is very like a cartoon or like a graphic novel where there's a line drawn, and this is, a 5,000-year-old piece, but you get the idea that this line is telling you that these figures are less important. Now, this is quite a different piece, Jan van Eyck, Madonna in a Church, 1437. This is Renaissance piece, and this is oil on wood, pre-canvas era. Canvas gets invented right around this time, but the Northern Europeans are still using wood. Now, you see how the Madonna is giant in this church. An ordinary human would be, down here, this size. But the idea of the Christ child and Madonna, how important they are in the church, that is why she is enlarged. And it's kind of interesting because it sort of makes a distorted scale statement, although it is not. We're dealing with a different kind of hierarchical scale to communicate the spiritual importance, but it looks similar to surrealism, which we're about to look at. So distorted scale, which here we are 500 years later, we are looking at a piece from the 1940s, and this has to do with dream imagery and psychoanalysis, a little bit of what we talked about with Joseph Cornell. But these figures are walking, but they're sort of defying gravity a bit. She's sort of leaning into nothing. The door jams sort of, but not exactly. Her hair is flying up. This flower, the sunflower, is giant. It's the size of her. She's got a petal here. There's peeling paper on the walls, or the paint might be peeling. So a lot of dream imagery can be very disturbing. Oh, and this door opens to a sunset, So surrealism, as you probably already know something about it. This is Dorothea Tanning. It's called Eine kleine Nachtmusik. It was from a famous musical piece, but it's something to do with dreams and imagery that doesn't make sense. So we see these kinds of things in dreams, but surrealism is trying to make sense of those imagery. And it's distorted scale, meaning this sunflower should not be this large, but it's trying to show you a distortion, so you're feeling that strangeness. Okay, so proportion is going to be important. Different cultures have different proportion ideals. So we're going to look into this. So the size of the different parts of work which make up its proportions. So it can enhance some descriptive characteristics. When we look at this particular piece, these are Greek vases. Now, when we look at this general piece, we see it fairly sturdy, but yet it has some nice height to it. This one looks more elegant because it is elevated and thinner, and this looks more sturdy or heavy because it is more squat, if that makes sense. So the proportions, this is the idealized form. You do see these other two, and in Greek vases, they have a very particular proportional range and different titles for them. We get into human proportions. Ancient Egypt is very different than what we see, and we know that too. If you think about an Egyptian image immediately, we just looked at a few, but even if you hadn't, you would think about this strange proportions that they have, right? So the palm of the hand is a unit of measurements. The Greeks, and then thus the Romans, and then the Renaissance, which is the rebirth of Greco-Roman culture, they're looking at more mathematical basis, and it's close to reality. Egypt is not as interested in reality. Okay, so for the Egyptians, a cubit is 6 palms wide, 4 fingers equals 1 palm. 6 palms is 1 cubit. Now, people were a fair amount shorter at this point in time, so we're probably thinking about palms that are slightly smaller than what we would think of nowadays. But at any rate, this is how they would measure the human form. Now, it doesn't look correct to us. The legs are quite long here, but there would be 24 palms, 4 cubits. You've probably heard of a cubit perhaps before, but that's how they had a standard of measurement. Horses are still measured in this way, hands high. You say a horse is, gosh, no, it's more than 24 palms. It's usually like 30 hands high, but they measure it at the withers, which is like the shoulder. Okay, slightly different culture. So we're in Nigeria here, and we're looking at a 14th century, 15th century piece. And this is disproportionate in a bodily way. The head is considered the most important part of the body. So Oni, who is important in Nigeria, would have a very large head. Okay, so he's the most powerful, important figure in Yoruba culture. We look at Yoruba on and off quite frequently in this book and in many history books, art history books, because a lot of their work has survived. That's part of the reason, but also we've had a lot of contact with Yorubans. Okay, so there's a lot of African culture we don't look at. Unfortunately, some of their works do not survive. Maybe the materials are made of like textiles and have not survived to the present day. But that's kind of an interesting piece. So that one was made out of brass, by the way, and a little bit of lead. So it's seat of the divine power. So that's why there's an exaggeratedly large head, because it communicates status, destiny, and the spiritual world. Okay, so this is going to be quite different. I'm going to come right back.